Hey there, this is Paul from Road Less Traveled, and this is another episode of Deep 7. Tonight, we're going to be looking at Revelation in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at the events of Revelation from each study. We're going to take a little bits and pieces of Revelation or prophecy from the Old Testament as it relates to deep things of Scripture, or maybe we'll talk about some deep spiritual aspects of the Bible that we don't really hear about in church a lot. But tonight, I want to go to Revelation chapter 13, and I want to look at the Antichrist. I want to look at the Antichrist in the Old Testament, and then we ask ourselves, was this just written by somebody in the first century with no correlation to anything that God had ever talked about before? And the answer is absolutely not. Everything we find in the book of Revelation, everything we find in the New Testament has roots in the Old Testament. So we're going to look at the brief little passage in chapter 13 of Revelation as it pertains to the Antichrist. And then we're going to jump into Daniel chapter 9 and see that this is not something that John just made up or had a bad dream about one night. So in Revelation chapter 13, we read this. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and the 10 diadems on its horns, and a blasphemous name on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. So here is a passage that we look at and we understand who this is. And you look at these description: the leopard, the bear, the lion, a dragon. These are all things that we find in the book of Daniel. So here we see this Antichrist character coming up, rising up, getting power. Then in verses 5 and 6, we read this about him. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Okay, so clearly we're learning here about the beast, the Antichrist of the book of Revelation, of the 7 year tribulation period. Then we jump over to Daniel chapter 9. And Daniel told us about that there would be 70 weeks of years, 77-year periods for the nation of Israel to complete God's program for Israel and for the rest of the world. So verse 24 of chapter 9 says this. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. So here's Daniel being given this prophecy. He's he's recorded it for us from the angel Gabriel, and it says 70 weeks or 77-year periods will be to the beginning and the end of time. And then he goes on to say this in verse 25 and 26. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and a moat, but in troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. So for 69 7-year periods, from this decree that set out to rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of Jesus Christ, there would be 69 7-year periods. And if you calculate that, if you go to where the decree went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and you calculate 69 7-year period, you come to the day that Jesus Christ rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, declared himself Messiah, and less than a week later, he was crucified for the sins of the world. And that's what it says here. Then for 62 weeks after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. That was Jesus. He was crucified, went back to heaven. resurrected, went back to heaven. Then it says this at the end of that verse: the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, Rome, 40 years after Jesus was crucified in 70 AD, came into Jerusalem, leveled the city, wiped it out completely, knocked down the temple, destroyed everything. And notice who they identify him with: the people of the prince who shall come. So Rome, we know, was the Roman Empire. The prince who shall come, we're going to learn about in the next verse that we just read about in chapter 13 of Revelation. You've got this prince who will come, and it says this about him in verse 27: and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. That's the 7-year tribulation. That's that final 70th week of Daniel. So you've got Jesus resurrecting from the dead, going back to heaven. The church age begins on the day of Pentecost. The church age will exist until the day of the rapture. After the rapture of the church, Israel will enter into the 7-year tribulation. The world will enter into the 7-year tribulation, known as the time of Jacob. And that's when this beast that rises up in chapter 13 of Revelation, and here in verse 27, it says, he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, 1 7-year period, and for half of the week he shall put an end to the sacrifice and the offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's when Jesus Christ returns and wipes out the Antichrist and his armies. We kind of talked about that in our first Deep 7 episode. So these are exciting things to look forward to. These are exciting things that we find in Scripture, and the things that we find in Revelation match up with the things we find in the Old Testament prophecies, and it's all stuff that will happen because God promised it. And it's very exciting times that we're living in, because we kind of see things lining up that maybe we're living in that day when Jesus Christ will call his church home. I hope this was a blessing to you, and I hope it chases you into Scripture and causes you to go and study deeper and read these things for yourself. And God bless you. Have a great night.